Hey everyone, welcome to Bon the AM with Scoops. Scoops with a cold and the
Hmm.
wolf and Total Biscuit.
Oh, generally not no cold over here. Just plain old wolf
A
as
wolf,
usual.
a wolf with a cold would be a sad thing indeed. It
Uh,
seems like it
oh,
would.
not good, not fun.
Exactly. We are joined today by John Total Biscuit Bain, who is someone that has a nickname, has a brand with them. So sometimes we have to come up with names when we host these shows. But John, you've got your own.
I'm quite disappointed, honestly. If I'd come in here without a brand, I could have got a new one live on air. That would have been phenomenal. And I could have got away from this terrible brand to begin with, but never mind.
See, I was never the wolf before this show. That was just something that Jeff yelled out when
Yeah.
he was coming up with dumb names, and then it stuck. So, what would you like your totally tossed off, thrown away other nickname to be?
Hmm. I, I've got this kind of mobster idea in my head. Vinny the Hat sounds like a good idea. We could go with that.
Mm. All
How did you end up with Total Biscuit? Was that just sort of like happenstance, something that kind of stuck, and then it was too late to go back?
It was a kind of that. Obviously, it's still my fault that I picked it in the first place. It was a one-off reference in one of my favorite Terry Pratchett novels, and that was it. There was no more meaning behind it whatsoever, other than it sounded good at the time, and I regret it strongly. But never mind.
I mean, that's how that stuff goes. We were talking about that last week. I mean, the root of the nickname I had online for the longest time came out of Extremer with a capital X,
Oh,
which is very unfortunate. And
Oh
at
God.
least at least later in life, things have moved toward using your real name. So I was kind of able to slowly ditch that. I remember there was a point pretty early on in Twitter where I had not Extremer, but a variant on that I had adopted, and then finally switched my name over to my real name, and it seemed like the better of the lesser of the two evils.
yeah. I think in the YouTube world, it's a bit difficult to move onto your real name unless you're very much a guy that focuses on real-life content. If you're doing gaming, well, you're probably stuck with whatever dumb username you picked in 2006 for your YouTube account.
And then is that like purely like just is any of like the search algorithm play into that, or is that just kind of once you've
Yeah,
got a name, people are searching for that?
it really is SEO. If you toss your brand like that, then you're giving up so much. We actually had to do a redirect to our channel because my channel is not called Total Biscuit. It was called Total Halibut initially, which was a WoW story. Don't even get me started. Those were dark times. World of Warcraft responsible for everything that ever went wrong in my life. But regardless, once you change your name, it's difficult to get people to adopt that. And once your search ranking is up there, it's probably going to stay there. So you really don't want to drop your brand. It's kind of suicidal. People know what to look for at that point.
I guess that's the nice part about at least how Twitter works in that when you change your name, you keep all the followers. It's not like you're starting a new account. I mean, obviously, if people are
Yes. Yeah.
searching for something, they're going to lose that. But at least you sort of retain that core base because starting from scratch of like redirecting millions of people, you're gonna lose a lot of the casual people along the way, no matter what.
And a lot of them are casual as well. It nicely ties into the idea of, hey, if YouTube goes to hell, what are we going to do? And there's a few sites we could go to, but how many people can we drag along with us for the ride? That's the real point. How many people will really follow, and how many just view whatever pops up in their YouTube subscription box and are not going to go out of their way to check a different site every day?
So here's a question I have for you then, as someone who is, obviously pretty locked in with YouTube stuff these days. How close are we to that apocalyptic point with YouTube right now? Like, how close are we to that whole thing just getting dragged down to hell?
It comes down to over the next few months how this whole monetization review thing plays out right now. Because at this point, we've got two kinds of partners. We actually used to have two kinds of partners. Technically, now still have two kinds of partners. That's why things have got a little strange. Beforehand, we had the unnetworked partner, which is someone that partners directly with YouTube, right? And they were subject to monetization review pretty much all the time. That was very common for them. And then you had your networked partner who wasn't. Now, they weren't because the MCNs, multi-channel networks, were supposed to be responsible for checking what was going on and just kind of keeping everything above board and policing their own guys.
And multi-channel networks, to be clear, are things like Machinima, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Machinima, Polaris, Fullscreen, there's quite a few of them that have popped up, and many of them might not even be names that are familiar to most people. But now we have this difference between affiliate and managed channels. And affiliates are now basically what these unnetworked partners used to have to deal with. And that's why we have some guys coming out of the woodwork and saying, well, I've been dealing with this forever. This is no difference to me. But the network channels haven't. They've had this blanket monetization permission, and now only managed channels do, because these problems, these copyright strikes that keep going on, they can affect the whole network if it happens to a managed partner. So the partner assumes direct legal responsibility for all of that. Now, what will happen over the next couple of months is this monetization review issue that means that any video can randomly get basically called to the side by the TSA and subject to a full-body cavity search. It could take up to several days to happen. And YouTube is promising it'll be faster, it'll keep going faster, you'll actually earn trust within the system, it'll happen less and less. However, this is YouTube we're talking about, and it probably won't. So what could happen to a lot of these partners, especially those that are really reliant on this kind of same-day content? They've got to be up to speed with everything, they've got to put their videos out on day one, and you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to embargoes, right?
Right, sure.
Embargoes. So these guys who are not managed partners potentially can't meet those review embargoes because they upload their video and suddenly they can't monetize it for 2+ days, so they can put their review out, but they won't make any money from it.
Right.
So
and that's
the real problem. Exactly. Yeah. I view that as utterly unacceptable for affiliates. I'm managed, so I'm not subject to it, but that's, it's kind of an edge, I suppose, for me, because I do a lot of embargoed content, but it's also BS. I don't want to have my competition suffering that. I'd rather know that, hey, I'm doing well on my own merits, not because I just got handed some little golden parachute and everyone else just got screwed by that. So that, I think, is, if you're asking about the apocalypse, that's where it's going to come from, because that's by far the biggest factor.
It seems like a lot of what YouTube is doing is trying to, in some ways you can be sympathetic to them because you look at what happened with Viacom, right, where they were sued for tens of millions of dollars over user-generated content, which is what YouTube makes its money off of, or makes a large part of it. They've tried to move into other venues, but at the end of the day, their bread and butter is people making content and monetizing that. And what they seem to have to do, because of their business model, is prepare themselves for the couple of assholes that could potentially take the company apart with huge copyright claims. And so they have to put these policies in place to protect against a couple of people or a couple of corporations or a couple of bad instances, and it ends up hurting everyone else in the process because their business model is predicated on having content generated by the users that may or may not have copyright that could potentially infringe.
Yeah, and technically the DMCA safe harbor laws are supposed to cover this. The thing is that ever since Google actually bought YouTube, they put in this gigantic system, content ID matching, which was very much above and beyond, along with the ability to take down any video essentially at will. Now, these are not DMCA takedown notices. That's very much a legal thing. A takedown notice on YouTube, a copyright strike, is not that at all. There are far more requirements on the DMCA takedown notice. They don't have to be instantly complied with in the way that these YouTube takedown notices do. So, really, Google went above and beyond, and now they're doing that yet again and requiring all of this monetization review. And a lot of it seems to have hit game content. It doesn't seem to be exclusively that, but games are the ones that got hit the hardest, because we are used to having some strikes, but not on this scale. We're not used to seeing a channel like Angry Joe getting 68 copyright claims on his most popular videos, which automatically removes the monetization on all of them. So that's his big, his most evergreen content, his strongest part of his back catalog is suddenly unmonetized because of these changes.
Is that because at this point, when it comes to people making original content off of YouTube using, technically copyrighted material like, games or whatever else, like, is it just that's where the volume is in the video game channels at this point?
Right now it is. It was a few months ago, I believe, that Google released a large white paper on this and actually was really pushing the benefits of gaming channels and saying, look at how popular this makes you. Look at the traction that's here. This is where the eyeballs are right now. The most subscribed channel on the internet is a gaming channel, loosely. know, PewDiePie. But,
It's just crazy that it's become that, because I remember when
Yeah.
it seemed like, people doing these Let's Plays and, long plays on YouTube was kind of like this weird token fringe thing. It's like even we were kind of on the fringe of what everyone else was doing, and now it seems like that is primarily what people use YouTube for when it comes to video gaming now.
It does seem to be that way, doesn't it? You can certainly present professionally created content on YouTube, and in some instances it does quite well, but there is a massive volume of this very sort of bare bones kind of content. This is game, microphone, and sometimes camera, and that's about as far as it goes for a lot of people.
And I wonder if the next step is, it's just sort of assumed that this is all sort of covered legally, like there are arguments that have been constructed that it makes sense and companies have given consent. But games are unique, and we haven't necessarily had a court ruling that sets a precedent over what is a transformative work. That's sort of like the key thing that we're talking about when we're discussing a Let's Play, like or any sort of like playing a game, talking it over, like however you want to classify that. Is just playing the game thus transformative, thus it is protected, and then maybe this would allow YouTube, at least in terms of video games, to back off on this to some extent. Maybe if there was some sort of ruling in place that provided some more legal clarity, but at the same time, once you go down that road, you open video games up, and a lot of people like yourself that do this for a living, and even us, we're moving in that direction too. This is all games writing, like whether it's on YouTube or on independent websites, like are doing a lot of the same things and are affected in different ways going forward. It's just kind of happening on YouTube first. I just wonder if maybe a legal precedent that sort of established what exactly makes it a transformative work and thus protected might actually help the whole thing in the long run.
I think so, and I really think we need to try and explore the boundaries of how fair use actually applies to video game footage. Over the past couple of weeks, and every time anything like this blows up, we always see people come into the argument, and they bring their movie analogies, and they bring their television show analogies. And every time, those analogies are just so incredibly flawed, because we're not talking about a static, non-interactive medium. We're talking about a medium where you cannot help but be transformative in some way, simply by virtue of playing it. Even playing a game that really has the same kind of outcome, like, say, Gone Home, for instance. Now, Gone Home is going to go pretty much the same way for everybody, but the pace is different, or the conclusions that you draw from that game are different, or even just the direction that you walked is different. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but compared to what you can do with a television show, I can't turn the character around and send them back out the door before they get shot by the assassin who's waiting in the living room. That's not something that you can do with a non-interactive medium. So the rules simply do not apply in their current form. Copyright law is obviously out of date, especially when it comes to interactive mediums. We need to figure out what's reasonable. We need to figure out where we need to go with it. And until that happens, we're currently quite reliant on publishers playing ball with us. And thankfully, over the last few days, we've actually seen an awful lot of publishers come out in direct support of video on YouTube and, of course, on other sites as well.
Yeah, because, that stuff helps them technically in the long run. A lot of companies could theoretically look at it and say, well, you're airing our content, people won't buy the game if they see this stuff, and, they won't, give us the money that we're so rightfully deserve. But at the same time, that doesn't seem like it's ever proven true. It seems like these things have actually helped bolster sales of a lot of those games in a lot of those cases. Yeah,
and another analogy that people are making is, well, it's the same as pirating a movie. If you're just posting all the cutscenes on YouTube, then people are just going to go watch that instead of playing the game. But no, that's not what games are about. Watching a game is a different experience from playing one, and if someone is not compelled to play your game after seeing parts of it on YouTube, then maybe your game just isn't that good in the first place. If I watch an hour-long quick look, I'm generally inspired to either play the game because it looks really, really good and you guys are having fun with it, or not play the game because the game's evidently terrible, and that was going to come out regardless. You can try and block off all of those kind of long-form pieces of video content, but a traditional review is still going to say this game is terrible. So we need to know about these games regardless. We'd prefer to know about them in this more honest medium. And you're right, there is no proven link between lost sales and uploading on YouTube. In fact, for most of the statistics that I have, it indicates the exact opposite, and I imagine yours reflect that.
Yeah, and it's oh, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the follow-up to that is, you said earlier that all these different publishers have come out and very much in favor of saying, we're on board with this, we think these things help us a lot, we want to support these different YouTube personalities. But then you have these instances where people are getting like 63 different, copyright claims, and like all this stuff's getting pulled down. Is there an understanding of where this stuff is actually coming from right now? Like, are the DMC claims coming from inside the house? Like, who is actually pushing this stuff forward right now?
There's a lot of false flagging going on at the moment, and it really comes down to a lot of these companies not understanding how Content ID works. And I don't blame them, because before this all went down, I had a lot of misconceptions about Content ID. It seems like the companies would have to go out of their way to use it. It turns out that a lot of these companies simply registered some content with Content ID to make sure that another company couldn't flat out steal it and claim it was theirs, right? That's the only reason they registered it.
Right.
A couple of the larger publishers, including Blizzard, expressed dismay on Twitter to people saying, we did not do this. This had nothing to do with us. It seems like YouTube automatically activated every Content ID on the planet all at once. It was a Skynet situation. All the nuclear missiles get launched in the air. No one had any idea what happened. And this also happened with a lot of music, and this was the biggest deal because music, more often than not, is actually licensed to multiple companies for multiple different uses, meaning that some game music ended up being triggered when the publisher in question didn't trigger the claim. Ubisoft right now is dealing with a company, I believe, called Idle, who license a lot of music for video games and all sorts of other things like trailers, and Ubisoft is saying, we did not start these claims, and we're going to get this sorted out for our games that use stuff that is licensed within the Idle licensing network.
Right.
And then, of course, you have people that are just claiming falsely. There was an instance of a channel called Nerdcubed doing a video about the Olympic Games video game, which was just horrible, which I think everybody knows. However, there's a short cutscene before you go into the cycling event. This cutscene was used on a Spanish news network, and they copyright Content ID claimed that footage based on the fact that they had used the same footage in their news broadcast and just blanket Content ID to everything on their channel, which is obvious nonsense. And there's a huge amount of irony because these news networks use those clips under fair use, which is exactly what was happening with Nerdcubed. He did it under critique. And then this one fair use claim nailed the other one to the wall. And neither of them actually had an exclusive right to that footage.
And I think one of the things that, when I look at all of this stuff is, right now, game companies treat essentially the traditional video game press differently than they treat, quote-unquote YouTubers, which really, in many ways, aren't doing anything different than what we do. They're just doing it in a different format, and they're doing it in a format that is, corporately hosted on a video service that can enact slightly different rules. But we've certainly had situations where Activision or other companies, they want the views for their new trailers to go to a YouTube channel, and the one that they are running, and then the one that they are monetizing. And if we were to put up a trailer, we've had takedown requests come in the past because we were hosting it on our site. But I think that what I find interesting about all of this is that it's basically just happening to yourself and others first, and there's no reason to not think that all of this wouldn't trickle down to people that are running their own independent websites and own independent video services at some point. It's just easier because right now Google is building the services to make it actually work on YouTube.
That's exactly true. And it is far, far easier to take down content on YouTube than it is anywhere else. You have to send an actual DMCA notice to a website. They have time to respond and to comply and things like that. On YouTube, there is no response. The video goes down immediately, then you must dispute that.
And it's just
that
you.
Can take up to 2 weeks.
You're not a company. You don't have an army of lawyers. There's it's much easier to target a single person or a couple of people that have never had to deal with something like that before. When a takedown notice shows up, I mean, that shit sounds really scary up front,
does, yeah.
even if ultimately what they're threatening with you is something rather innocuous. But it does seem really scary if you've never dealt with sort of legal paperwork before.
Yeah, and those claims include words like perjury, which sounds incredibly terrifying, because people go to jail for that. And yet I don't believe a single person has ever, in fact, been convicted of perjury under the notice of false flag takedowns. So that is a bit of a red herring there as well. And it warns you time and again, look, if you dispute this and you lose, that's a copyright strike that can affect your entire account for upwards of 6 months and disable your ability to monetize. 3 of those, you're out of the game completely. So, it's very scary.
Is there any way to, because I know, I've heard about the 3-strike sort of system. Like, once that happens, is there an appeal process, or is that just sort of 1, 2, 3 and you're out?
you have to talk to YouTube, and good luck, because that is like talking to a brick wall. Unless you have network support, then if your channel goes down, it's down for good. The issue last year with Sega and Shining Force, the Japanese publishers in particular, by the way, don't seem to dig YouTube at all.
No.
Sega have been
They don't like the internet.
Yeah, yeah, that's very, very true. And what happened was about 18 YouTube channels were hit with mass copyright strikes over supposed Shining Force footage. Yes, we're talking about Shining Force 3 here, a Sega Saturn game, highly relevant to the current games market. But some of this footage wasn't even footage. It just mentioned the word Shining Force in a vlog. There was no footage at all. And some of these channels were taken down, and they never came back. There's a list on a popular Shining Force website of these channels. About 3/4 of them never came back. So if there was an appeals process, it evidently doesn't work very well.
God. Well, let's say.
Yeah.
Sorry, let's say it actually comes down to the sort of doomsday scenario that you're talking about. Obviously there are ways that can be avoided still, but let's say it actually comes to that, and the people who are using YouTube to monetize this type of content simply cannot do that effectively anymore. Is there a second option? Because you look at something like YouTube, it's monolithic, it's huge, it's ubiquitous in the culture. There really isn't another video type service like that I'm aware of that has anywhere near that level of cachet. Is this something that you think can be built up again elsewhere, or does this really kind of fuck the whole thing?
I think the eyeballs are proven at this point, which means that if it's not happening on YouTube, it will happen elsewhere, but obviously it's going to take a lot of building up yet again. If I took all my subscribers to, say, Blip TV, which is an option, that's actually owned by one of the networks, Maker bought Blip TV, so I imagine that's designed as a bolt hole if this whole thing goes south. But how many of my subs can I really drag over there? There's going to be a massive period of rebuilding, and the monolithic point is a great one because YouTube is the second biggest search engine on the planet. Meaning that if you're not on YouTube, you might as well not really exist because Google really wants you to be there. And they have encouraged people to be there, which is strange that they've then come and kind of stabbed them in the back in that respect. I think the biggest option for a lot of people that maybe is comparable would be Twitch. Now, it's strange to suggest it because it's a completely different service. It's live streaming. But a lot of this content that we're doing right now could be done live in theory. It would take a lot of effort. There would be a lot more mistakes. The production quality wouldn't be quite there, but it could be done. And there is already a large audience there, and a lot of us have been using it for live streaming anyway. So moving our audience to Twitch and doing a lot of our stuff live, or maybe even going as far as, this is something that I kind of tossed out yesterday, the idea of taking your content, pre-making it, and then airing it at a specific time, and then relying on Twitch VODs, which are apparently improving. They're terrible right now, but the thing about using Twitch is that you can feasibly run more ads and people will accept it because they're used to that kind of thing. On YouTube, if you even mid-roll an hour-long piece of content, people actually get antsy about that, which is very strange because you compare that to network television, and a minute of ads for an hour of content seems pretty fair in the grand scheme of things, but people don't really take to it. But you run an ad after every, say, StarCraft ladder game, people are totally fine with that. Some of them ask you to run more because they want to support you. They want to feel like they're contributing. So maybe that's a possibility, but other VOD services, they would have to go out of their way to market themselves to gamers, and then, of course, they open themselves up at potentially the same kind of risks.
I'm just imagining the entire gaming content stream of YouTube filing over to Twitch, and I am just imagining that site just caving under the weight of that, because it can barely handle the amount of traffic it has now.
That's very true. If Twitch is gearing up to this kind of thing, then I hope they're gearing up quickly and effectively, because otherwise they're going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how that stuff plays out. It's obviously, if nothing else, it's when these sort of near-apocalyptic scenarios happen, at least more people are informed, which means more people can talk about it, which means more people can bitch about it, and then hopefully that will create a pushback for YouTube, or at least to consider how it should handle its policies going forward. But Alex, did you play anything over the weekend?
Oh, content shift. Let's see. I finally got into Call of Juarez Gunslinger.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. That game kicks ass.
I have had a huge aversion to anything with the words Call of Juarez on it for good reason, because that franchise has mostly been garbage the whole way through. But after seeing everyone pick up on it again this past weekend, I guess for Game of the Year deliberation stuff, I finally picked it up, and I got about, I think, halfway through it. Yeah, that game's really good. I am super surprised by how good that game is. I love the quick draw duel stuff. I love, like, even just running around shooting stuff in that game is weirdly satisfying for how bad a lot of those games have been in the past. I am surprised by that one.
Yeah, the cartel was just terrible.
Oh yeah.
It was a nice idea, but it almost reminds me actually of Walking Dead Survival Instinct in the sense of, oh, these guys have some interesting ideas and either don't have the time, money, or talent to implement any of them properly. But Gunslinger, they went with the nice simple idea of this is a linear arcade FPS, it's $15, enjoy.
And it works.
It works so well.
It all works in concert really nicely. Like, a couple of those the fights I found a little frustrating, but honestly, like, I'm genuinely surprised by how balanced and generally pretty fun that game is. Other than that, I just played a bunch more Zelda as I kind of worked my way through that one. I played a little bit more of Dead Rising 3, which, I don't know. I like that game. I think mechanically it's very fun. I still think I'm not getting into the story or the characters at all whatsoever. After hearing about some of the things that happened later in that game, I still want to work my way through it. But I think at this point it's actually going to be for just the rampant zombie murdering that more than anything else, which is a nice change of pace because that was something I found more frustrating in the other two Dead Rising games than this one. So I'm pretty happy with how this one is playing out mechanically.
Yeah, like going back to Call of Juarez for a second, the problem with that game in particular is not even the game itself. It's that Techland at this point has become a developer that you just can't count on every single time. Where maybe you're going to get the good Techland, which puts out Dead Island, which is a really interesting game with a fascinating combat system. But then Dead Island Riptide comes out, and oh god, they clearly assigned the C team to this one, and this game is terrible, and the real talent is working on Dying Light. Whereas, Call of Juarez, Bound in Blood, I think is a pretty kick-ass game because it's super weird. But then the Cartel is complete garbage, so I don't blame anyone for not wanting to check out Gunslinger. But it's too bad because Gunslinger, super stylish, like great soundtrack, like just really fun to play, and the actual sort of like the one-on-one duels work surprisingly well.
Yeah, it's a small but fun thing.
Yeah, moving away from the mechanics for a second, the narrative conceit of that game I thought was absolutely fantastic. It was, I think, Idle Thumbs podcast, the latest episode we're talking about that, the idea of Western tall tales. Yeah. And that's exactly what it is, because you hear the narrative and then it completely conflicts with what you did on screen, and you're entirely okay with that, because it sounds like someone has either just become some kind of Western legend where he really isn't, or he's deliberately talking up his own achievements. And that, to me, I think worked incredibly well in terms of telling the story and just putting that right amount of cheese on top of it and really giving you that awesome experience without going overboard with the exposition.
Yeah, totally. It's surprising how well they actually flesh out that Silas Greaves character over the course of that thing. And I love the way that, like, he will sit there and just yell back at whatever story is being told to him. It's like, yeah, that's not how it happened. And then the level will actually start to redraw certain aspects of what's happening on screen. That was
fantastic.
Cool.
Yeah, I remember the first time that happened where I believe it said something about being ambushed, and it's like, no, that didn't happen at all. And that just rewinds the whole thing and lets you do it again. It's like that is clever. That is executed really, really well. I imagine if the game were longer, that would really get very played out. But it's a shorter experience. It's a $15 experience, and I think within those boundaries, it works incredibly well.
Totally.
Yeah, it definitely was one of those. That came out right along the same time as Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon, which is, again, whether or not the humor clicked for you or not in Blood Dragon, I know, Alex, you didn't care for it as much. It definitely made me really excited that Ubisoft was, putting out these sort of little downloadable, isolated experiences that, if they fleshed them out, I don't think they would work, or at least they would become boring in a way that it would have fundamentally made those games flawed and unfun over like a 18-hour period. But as a downloadable sort of 6-hour experience, you get to the end, you're like, you know what, I could go for more of this, but that's also a really good feeling that I got almost exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, exactly. I could go for more of this the next time they want to make one of these. I don't necessarily need more of this right now. I can take a little break. But yeah, I'm definitely in favor of these smallish downloadable experiences that feel like they have, the attention and the mechanics and like the amount of effort paid that a lot of the bigger games get, but aren't are dedicated to these like 5-6 hour experiences that are just very tight and well managed. That's something that I'd love to see a lot more of next year.
And I think it's the kind of thing that needs to be happening more as gamers get older and just get more and more busy with family life and real jobs and things like that. It is amazing that I can sit down and play through a whole game in a few hours for maybe $10, $15, have a good time, and not really feel like I need to play 18 more hours of it to really get my money's worth out of that.
Absolutely.
And my time is very limited, and if I want to play games for fun, then that format is just so perfect for me. So hopefully that happens a lot more.
Absolutely. Patrick, what have you been playing?
Well, I finished Zelda. I feel like I might have mentioned that on a previous show. Really enjoyed that. I mean, I didn't play a whole lot of games last week because I was in San Francisco.
That's right.
For the Game of the Year deliberations and simultaneously also the CBS holiday party, which did not plan, but I thought that was pretty funny that the one week I managed to go back is also when that was happening.
Convenient.
Very convenient.
May or may not have something to do with the fact that we didn't have a show on Friday morning. I cannot confirm or deny such rumors or allegations. But yeah, so a lot of last week was instead, I flew all the way to San Francisco to box myself into a room, which you were a part of.
Which I was able to Skype into pretty easily. So I don't know, maybe next year you don't have to necessarily fly all the way out for that. Just saying.
There's something about being able to stab someone in the neck as you're removing their game from contention in something that is not quite the same over the internet. But yeah, so we finished all that stuff up. Can't really talk too much about that because we're saving all that for next week. Obviously, as Vinny and Drew start going through the video portion of that, which I've seen some of that stuff, and it's something.
Traditional.
It's something. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very strict. It's just like other websites like to present their content. Very professional.
Excellent.
I'm super excited to see how all that stuff turns out. But yeah, it's also kind of weird to be it's still December and be in a post Game of the Year space, right? Like it's all rolling out next week, but like my list is solidified. It's already been recorded and taken care of. Yeah, well, yeah, you didn't have to do that because you weren't there to record your little video bit, but. Yes, you can still play games and figure that out. I had to solidify my list.
I'm like that close now. I'm that close.
Yeah. John, do you do any Game of the Year stuff? Like, what do you do for the end of the year?
I generally just do a top 10, which usually gets a decent amount of attention. I've had to sort of qualify it lately. The first time I did just top 10 games of 2000. There was either 10 or 11, and then there was a lot of disagreement from the community on that one in the comment section, as there always is. And I started qualifying it with my top 10 games,
right?
And just said, look, these are the games that I enjoyed playing. So when someone comes along and tells me why isn't The Last of Us on your 2013 list, I will tell them it's because I didn't enjoy playing it. So as a result, it's not on the list. It's really as simple as that.
Well, that's why I've actually been kind of surprised that no other website has really sort of just kind of copied what Giant Bomb does, because by putting out these ridiculously long podcasts that are the exact deliberations that result in the top 10 list for the site, not the personal ones, but obviously people's personal feelings play into that. It at least provides, if someone wants to, if they look at a list and go, God damn it, why didn't they include that on there? I mean, it's certainly possible that it just didn't come up, but more often than not, that game was mentioned and then either dismissed or removed for a specific reason. Whether it was political or part of a horse trade to get another game on a list. That stuff happens, but it's what I really like about what Giant Bomb does, because you can go back and see the evidence of how we arrived at our stupid conclusions, and you may still disagree with us, but at least you know how we got there.
Yeah, and I certainly think you've got to explain the positions as heavily as possible, and I've tried to do that with the top 10s, but people do take that very, very seriously a lot of the time. So.
They do. They take it very personally, and I consider that to be a compliment that someone gets upset that because I think ultimately what sometimes it comes down to is people view a lot of what we do as either validating their own likes and dislikes and purchases, or giving recognition to a game that they really like. So when someone gets upset that I didn't like a game that they did, I almost just the fact that they care that much to be upset at what my opinion is, like, that's a really cool thing in a way, as long as you can kind of look past some of the insane comments that you sometimes get in the same vein.
It's really the only way you can look at that without just wanting to drown yourself. It's the best way of handling it. It's, oh, great, well, he cares, so I win in that respect. Somebody went out of their way to watch me and then went out of their way to engage further with comments to try and disagree with what I said, so evidently it didn't just go in one ear and out the other, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely the way to look at it. But top 10 lists and all that kind of stuff, people take extremely seriously alongside game scores. So you do have to be a little bit careful, but I'll do the same thing I always do. Hey, these are the games I enjoyed playing. But it's funny that you should have mentioned that you kind of got it all on lockdown now, because I thought I had it on lockdown, and then I played 2 titles which really messed with my list.
Okay.
Can you say what they are?
Yeah, I can. One of them that I broke out, I actually plugged my Wii U back in. Mm-hmm. It was covered in dust. I had to clean off the gamepad and all sorts of things like that, charge the gamepad up. And at this point, I lost my internet connection for a day because Time Warner unilaterally decided I didn't need business internet anymore and canceled the whole thing without warning anybody. So while I was getting that sorted out, I thought, hey, what's the console that really works without an internet connection? Oh, yeah, the Wii U. Let's plug that back in. And I had the sealed copy of the Wonderful 101. And decided to pop that in because I absolutely love almost everything Platinum's ever made. Plugged it in, got through the tutorial, which was highly confusing. And then suddenly that game kind of clicked with me, and I had an absolute whale of a time with it. And I thought to myself, what an interesting and original way to present what is basically a spectacle fighter brawler. Yeah. And how much character this game actually has, and how enjoyable and colorful it really is, and the music in the background is just absurd. The notion that there's just this male choir singing about superheroes in this world that doesn't even exist, and this giant bus for no reason. It's like, yep, this is a Platinum game. And I think if I play a little bit more of that's probably going to be a game that's certainly in contention.
Yeah, I think I wish that game clicked for me. I tried multiple times to get it to click for me, and it just didn't. It's possible that if I pressed forward, I could maybe get to the place that you were. It's just, when you have to try and play all of the major games every single year, there are a few that you inevitably have to leave behind. I think that's one that I've inevitably had to leave behind, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm pretty much anything on the Wii U has been that for me. I've dabbled in Monster Hunter a little bit, and then the only time it's ever got used is for my son to play Mario. It's really as simple as that. But I think with Platinum, I go out of my way to try and like it, because everything they've made for me, and even, of course, the stuff they used to do as Clover, has really been some of my favorite games that I've ever seen. I really like the way they design games. I like their massive focus on mechanics. I like how they don't take the storyline too seriously, and they go deliberately blasé with almost everything they do. And the fact that they made a Kami and God Hand, to me, is enough of a reason for me to kind of venerate them, I suppose.
Totally.
So, yeah, Wonderful 101 definitely has some problems. I'll absolutely admit that. And it does a terrible job of explaining itself, but I think maybe I just click with the Platinum logic these days. So that's a game that I enjoyed an awful lot. And the other one, which just snuck in and devoured most of my Saturday, was actually Path of Exile.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've not actually had the chance to try that one out at all.
I've heard a lot of good things about it, and people were definitely last week sending me a lot of messages of, hey, we know you guys are going into Game of the Year deliberations. Like, someone needs to play Path of Exile, but I don't know too much about it. Can you break down what it is?
Sure. So I did quite a lot of coverage in their beta and alpha for this particular title, and it's an independently developed Diablo clone, essentially, and its aesthetic is very Diablo 2-esque. It's got this pseudo-realistic look to it. It's taken away a lot of the colors, a lot of the cartoony nature, and they very much said, look, this is kind of designed to be gritty. There's very little humor in this. You're an outcast that's been exiled to this place, which is just horrible. The dead come back to life. Everything's out to murder you. Not a nice place to live in general. So you're expected to survive about 5 minutes, go. And that's the storyline in a nutshell. And it's pretty grim. But as you go into it, you gain your power in a very unique way. With other games like Diablo, you'll level up and you'll gain abilities. Simple as that. Doesn't get any more complicated. Path of Exile has this gigantic skill system, which is, if you think of the sphere grid from Final Fantasy X, and then you blow that up about 5 times larger than that.
Okay.
You have this giant passive grid, which you can skill into almost anything. You can go in the same direction as, say, a class which is totally different to you. It'll take you a little longer to get there, but you can go that way. And those passives actually support what you're doing. And your skills actually come from drops, skill gems, which you slot into items, and you can swap them around at will. But these skill gems also level up. But further on, you get support gems, which actually add a secondary effect or bonus to that. And you can link them together in a complicated chain. Some of these items have 6 sockets, so you can link this to this to this to this. So let's say I had a projectile. Let's say I had flame arrow. I get a support gem called fork. Now my flame arrow splits off. It does a little bit less damage, but now it splits off. Then I link it to something which adds, say, an electricity effect or bounce effect. And suddenly, you're kind of building your own skills, and you're using the skills that you find enjoyable at the time, and you're building a character around the idea that you could swap your skills out at any time and really customize them. And mechanically, that game is rock solid as a direct result. It's also quite daunting as a direct result.
I'm looking at this skill tree right now, and holy shit, you're right. This does look like just a sphere grid on acid.
Huge sphere grid, yeah.
Oh my god, this thing is enormous. I don't even know, like, how much ability do you have to start going down a path and then realize, oh no, I have chosen wrong, or do you need to kind of start a new character if you go too deep?
That's the terrifying part of it. Yeah, they went into this being they wore it on their sleeve, saying, "Look, we're aiming for the more hardcore audience here." And I think the way Diablo 3 went down very much benefited them because they were able to differentiate themselves from a game that has a hell of a lot more budget behind it, as opposed to just an indie team out of New Zealand making a free-to-play game. But in the process of doing that, they said, "Look, your character is your character. There are some abilities to respec, but you gain what are called respect points. You actually gain these currency items called orbs of regret, funnily enough, which allow you to remove a passive point. But they're quite costly. You don't pay for them with money or anything like that. The currency system in the game is actually based on this sort of item trading, where there are currency items. A scroll of identify, for instance, is a currency item. You can buy stuff from vendors with them. And then you can translate one into another, and there's this kind of very complex economy system behind it. But respecking is difficult, so you're stuck with your character. And you're encouraged, of course, to roll up a new one if you mess that up. And some people are going to absolutely hate that, and I don't blame them at all, because it's a gigantic waste of your time. I think it's something you've got to be a little bit careful of. Initially, you can spec into pretty much anything, but once you start getting your character up to higher levels, you must be really careful, because you're dealing with endgame content. You need to be tougher. You need a certain amount of evasion, and so on and so forth.
I think an Orb of Regret is perhaps the video game item I would most like to apply to my real life.
Fantastic. Yeah, that would definitely work. It sounds
I could use that for a lot of things.
Well, folks have questions in the chat. Feel free to shoot some our way, to myself, to Alex, to John. We'll address some of those as we start to wind down the show. Trying to see, there's a bunch of small news, Alex, that has happened.
The PS4 was the top-selling console, but the Xbox One was the fastest-selling console. What? What?
I hate sales numbers.
Yeah, it's a terrible place to go right now.
X projected to win console war. Y projected to win console war. Well, this console war's going to be going on for a while, so let's just suck it and see, shall we?
It is what it is.
Yeah, I'm definitely more curious to see. I have not looked into it too much because I was out Friday evening hanging out with friends, but people started getting their Steam machines of the 300 folks that were selected to be part of a sort of a private beta that Valve is running. The machine itself is sort of whatever. Even the OS part is sort of whatever to me. Like I want to know how the hell this controller works and how people are feeling about it. Because I watched that video and it seemed interesting, and I'm glad that they're just not making another twin stick or dual stick sort of analog controller. I'm glad they're trying something new. But as with anything that radically new, it's hard to know anything about it till I'm going to have it in my hands.
Yeah.
I have to wonder. I've seen some more videos. There's been an awful lot of videos actually coming up of those who've got the Steam machine saying, hey, here's me playing Metro. Here's me playing TF2 using this controller. And TF2 is a really bad test case because some of those classes literally only do one thing. So I don't know how good you are as an FPS player because you're holding down the button as a heavy or you're holding down the button as a medic. You could probably do that on a controller, yes, but I would love to see a precision shooter. Let's see something like Quake Live done on this thing. Now, there's the real test as to how accurate and how quick this thing actually is. But so far, it seems to be working pretty well for a lot of people. There's mixed opinions. Some people are digging it more than others. Some people are getting used to it quicker than others. But certainly for single-player games, it looks absolutely functional. But then again, a twin stick is also absolutely functional for those games. So does it give the mouse and keyboard experience?
Yeah, you know, I think for me, the games that I'm curious about are not whether it would make Half-Life, you know, a better experience. Like, I'm fine with a keyboard and mouse, I'm fine with a controller. Those are games that I don't feel are compromised in the way that I enjoyed them on a computer monitor or when connected to my TV. But, you know, it's looking at some of those games like Civilization, you know, or Papers, Please, you know, games that, you know, sitting up on a couch are just not going to be very comfortable, you know, even with like a lap board or some elaborate setup. And, you know, the video they showed that showed Civ 5 and showed Papers, Please and ways of manipulating, you know, and replicating a mouse environment, those are the ones that I want to know if they work. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll replace how I primarily play those, but if it is an option, you know, I think that's a more interesting potential solution rather than making, you know, Half-Life a more playable game, which I think is just trying to, you know, solve a problem that isn't actually a problem right now.
Yeah, and really that's the whole Steambox's issue. Outside of all of the hype, what problem exactly is the Steambox actually trying to solve? And is it going to be practical for anybody to really buy this kind of thing? Because the way that we had it explained to us was, you know, through their marketing, okay, this will let you stream games from your PC via this smaller box. But you can also get a box that's more powerful, so you don't need to stream the games. And there's also a controller. And it uses a Linux-based operating system that you might want to use on your desktop. But now they've just come out and said, well, no, this is designed for use on your TV. So these performance benefits that they were explaining with SteamOS are evidently not in the first beta, which is to be expected. But Valve are also saying, look, this is an OS designed for your living room, not for your desktop. So I think it does leave a lot of existing PC users in a very confused space at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Before we jump to questions, I just wanted to very briefly eulogize another studio that went down this year, Terminal Reality, which we still have seen no actual official confirmation of them shutting down, but it sounds like everyone who actually works for them and everyone who is just, you know, was involved in that whole thing has basically just said publicly, yes, we have shut down, so it seems all but confirmed at this point. That is a studio that always seemed like they were on the cusp of doing something really, really good and then never quite did it.
Hey, I thought that Ghostbusters game was pretty kick-ass. I enjoyed that game.
I didn't. I really wanted to, and that was probably the game of theirs that I was the most excited for, but something about just the delivery and the actual mechanics of ghost busting did not do it for me, I'm sad to say.
So busting did not make you feel good, then?
It didn't. I know, and it's one thing it's supposed to do. It had one job, make busting feel good, and it did not do that, and I was pretty bummed out by that. But, I mean, it's like, you know, they had Blood Rain, which was reasonably successful to them over the years. Patrick, you obviously remember Blair Witch Volume 1, Rust and Par. That was made by them.
I'm going to try actually, you know, it actually works out. I was going to try and finish that game live on the site this week, and I guess there is no better week to do that than with the demise of Terminal Reality. But, you know, a lot of people, Terminal Reality became a name once they heard of games like Blood Rain, but I was playing their games like when that studio started, like Terminal Velocity and Fury 3.
Hellbender.
Were some of the first games I played, like on, you know, as Windows was starting to get its kind of like feet under itself in terms of trying to be a gaming platform. At that point, you were largely playing things on DOS. And, you know, they made Monster Truck Madness, which is a kick-ass game. Like, Monster Truck Madness is a really good game. I'm sure it doesn't hold up at all in 2013, but at the time, Monster Truck Madness was such a good game. And they, you know, Fly and like some other weird stuff. Like, I'm looking at their Wikipedia page, and they made a lot of really interesting games early on in their life. And, you know, Blood Rain ended up being sort of their breakout hit that just wasn't, you know, I think very good. It had an interesting character design, and at the time, you know, having a sexy female character like is a good way to draw attention to your game. And I actually liked the mythology, you know, setting it sort of like vampires and Nazis. You know, that's something that's up my alley in terms of camp. But, you know, it never just quite clicked for them, and at some point they became an outsourcing house. You know, and like the last games they worked on were Survival Instinct and Connect Star Wars, which that's not, you know, not a big surprise. I guess.
It's an ignoble end.
I guess.
I mean, before that, they did Def Jam Rap Star, which wasn't that bad. You know, that was like surprisingly okay rap karaoke game that could have been way worse, considering how bad most rap karaoke games were. I'm just saying they had flashes of brilliance. It just didn't come together in the end, which is unfortunate and sad.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And it's it's always sad when people lose their jobs, for sure.
That's very true. And honestly, as much as people like to rail on them for Connect Star Wars, I'd like to see any other company do that game better. It was a terrible idea from the outset. Why did people expect it to be good? I cannot imagine. This is not waving a lightsaber in anyone's definition of the term, and it never would be. So they did the best they could, I guess. It did end up, of course, just, I would say, pissing on the grave of the franchise, but perhaps that's a little unfair. Regardless, it
that grave was piss-soaked for years. I don't think it's their fault, really.
The smell was pungent in the air from 30 feet away before that even happened. So, in the world where the Star Wars Holiday Special exists, I think that Connect Star Wars is not perhaps the biggest crime that anyone could have committed against that franchise.
Agreed.
Alex, people are wondering, they want to know where your cat is.
Not in the room. Sorry. I know people have been complaining this has been a catless year on the show. We still have one more episode to do this year before we go on break, so maybe Friday we'll make that special cat day for everybody if people are really excited to see some cats on air. Guess what? They're cats.
I mean, and my dog kind of looks like a cat. It's the size of a cat. I can get
small
Pixel.
Cat at that.
Yeah, pretty much. John, do you own any animals that you would accidentally feature on your videos?
That get brought in deliberately to maul my face during podcasts is our Shiba Inu puppy is kind of averse to being picked up, but when she is picked up, she sort of spreads her arms out like a bat, which is fairly entertaining for people, but we only just got an animal because we moved into a place that would allow it. So that's been an interesting experience up to this point. We're trying to stop the house from being eaten and chewed to pieces.
That's fair.
You might as well just let go. As soon as you let go, it becomes okay. You're free. Stressing over it kills you.
Xanadu in the chat, John, he asked you if you've given up completely on Need for Speed Rivals, or if you have any plans to go back to it. I know that proved problematic.
I'm with you, John. I'm with you.
That's one way to put it, yes. I'm sorry. If you lock your game to 30 FPS and then tie that frame rate to the actual physics engine of the game to the point where it becomes unplayable if you unlock it, that is a problem for me as a PC gamer. I'm over 30 FPS. I've been over 30 FPS for a long time. I've actually struggled with things like Dead Rising 3 because of both kind of clunky controls and 30 frames per second is less than enjoyable for me. I have heard that some rather enterprising modders have managed to make that game playable at 60. I'm kind of tempted to go back to it, but there's a lot of that game where I feel like the game is insulting my intelligence on a fairly consistent basis, both through absolutely needless and redundant tutorial nonsense and dialogue that was written by a 10-year-old who just discovered Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, that's something we have talked about a lot as well, is the dialogue, the cop racer dialogue in that game is, when you start to think about it too much, the fact that it was written by an adult, it actually, it kind of freaks you out a little bit.
You can't catch devils with angels, Patrick.
Yeah, is this what our generation has been raised to be capable of, is writing dialogue like this, actually producing something like this for a major multi-million-dollar corporation and then putting it out for people to pay $60 for it? It is fucking insane! The story of that game is fucking insane!
Yeah.
I don't know how that happened.
I agree.
You are asleep. I am awake. What can I say?
John, some people asking, what do you think about the Wii U in general as a result of being forced into an internetless land, and then playing the wonderful 101? What do you make of that machine in general? And is it something that you'll only go back to if you somehow just don't have the internet?
It's a dark time in my life, but I'm starting to really get the feel for that gamepad. I always thought that it had some potential. And
I really
with
like
things
the
like
layout. It feels really nice to play games on that.
Surprisingly so, because you think that this is big, but I have big hands, so it works for me quite nicely. A lot of these newer gen things, especially the D-pads, are actually giving me hand cramp. But on Monster Hunter in particular, I'm noticing how useful this damn thing can be, because otherwise, controlling everything with a large inventory and swapping between weapons and doing everything properly in that game with just a controller can be a bit fiddly. With this giant touchscreen that manages all of this stuff for me and moves unnecessary UI elements away from the screen, away from being in my way, it's actually quite a good experience. And it's a technologically limited machine, but let's be honest, these next-gen consoles are also giving me 30 frames per second regardless, so maybe I'm getting less fidelity, but there are some interesting titles on there. The problem, I think, is that there's really no incentive to continue to develop them at this point, because nobody owns the bloody thing. It's a horrible catch-22. And Platinum absolutely loves to develop games for systems that maybe they don't get eyeballs on, and they somehow don't care and survive anyway. But it worries me that they would be the only people outside of Nintendo really taking it seriously.
Yeah, I mean, Platinum's just a studio that, speaking of terminal reality, like, I mean, Platinum makes much better games than terminal reality, but, Platinum's a studio that makes highly acclaimed games that just don't seem to sell very well, or are assigned to publishers that are sort of inept in marketing them and getting the word out there on them. And so they're a studio that really shouldn't exist. And yet, it's encouraging that companies continue to take a chance on them and sort of fund their batshit crazy projects. I mean, I highly recommend, John, if you never played Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, that's supposed to come out on PC any day now, and that game is so fucking platinum in the best way possible. Like, it is so stupid and so much fun, and I love the fact that it's an action game that flips you on the defensive as opposed to being on the offensive all the time, which is how most of those games are built. And it's just, as someone that gets tired of Metal Gear's bullshit, that game embraces it and subverts it in some really, really fun ways.
Yeah, I barely have any experience with Metal Gear games outside of Metal Gear Rising, and I bought it solely on the promise that this is a Platinum title, and I looked at it, and I thought, oh, look, this is running at 60 frames per second. It's an action game on the PS3, running at 60 FPS. Still looks great somehow, don't know how they pulled that off, and is incredibly fun to play. And it's also one of those games where you actually just have to watch every cutscene to see how ludicrous it's going to end up being. And I cannot wait for that to come out on PC. I'm a little concerned because it's Platinum's first PC port, and we saw how that went with Dark Souls. But if the game's good enough, then enterprising modders will fix the damn thing. So I'm very much hoping that I don't have to go on air and say, look, I'm sorry, guys, this game's great, but the port is just terrible.
On a scale of 10 to 1,000, speaking of PC things that are coming out recently, how excited are you for Just Cause 2 multiplayer?
I've been looking at that. I found out initially about it because I kept getting tweets from people claiming that I was playing the beta at that point, which I actually was not. There's this one guy that keeps taking my name every time. I'm not sure what's happening there, but
he's a fan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not creepy at all.
He may or may not have been going around calling people horrible names, but regardless, I just feel that's enthusiasm and passion coming from
He's trying to help spread the brand awareness.
Yeah, haters are very useful, apparently, in this modern new media world that we have, but that is looking kind of great. I've got to be honest there. I wonder how long it will take for the novelty value of that to kind of wear off, because blowing each other up sounds hilarious, but I heard from a lot of people that that's kind of how GTA Online ended up being. It ended up being incredibly frustrating as a result because you got nothing done. But I don't know just how many activities they've really got in this outside of just killing other people. So we'll see.
All right. Well, the last thing I would leave us on is that John, someone in the chat mentions that you are as big a fan of Risk of Rain as potentially we might be. Is that true?
That game is evil in the best possible way.
It really is.
I love going back into that game and failing. It's a game that I look forward to seeing how far I can get before I absolutely fail once again. The only, I suppose, problem I've had with it really is that it takes a very long time to unlock different characters, and there's very specific ways to do that. So that was a little frustrating for me, considering how long I've put into it. But it's incredibly satisfying, and the soundtrack is probably in my top 3 of the year.
Yeah, it's the music. That's one of the few games I actually just went and ripped all the damn music out of the game so I could just kind of listen to it as background sound because it is so goddamn good.
It is, and funnily enough, he's not a well-known composer at all, really, and he did a phenomenal job with that soundtrack. It reminded me, I heard bits of Alexander Brandon in there, definite influences from the Deus Ex and the Unreal soundtrack, but with his own unique spin on it. It is a phenomenal set of music, and
Agreed.
it goes along to a great game, and his name is almost impossible to pronounce properly, so trying that might not be a very good idea. I think it's Christodolo or something along those lines. Got a lot of U's in it.
Close enough. Close enough.
It works.
So Alex, what do you got coming up on the site this week? Are you like me, working on private game of the year stuff?
Yeah, I got to finish my personal top 10 list, which I'm again very close on. There's a couple games I need to get a little more into to decide one way or the other. I am currently shepherding all the other guest top 10 lists that will appear on the site throughout next week. No spoilers, nothing I'm going to say here other than to say I am very excited about some of the names we have this year, and I will leave it at that. That's pretty much it for me.
Yep. And I'm working on all that stuff too, helping you out with some of that, corralling some people along to submit their things as we get nearer to the end of the week. But John, we have appreciated you having you come on the show today. We appreciate you giving us an hour. If people aren't aware of you somehow, like where should they follow you after this? Like where can they check out your stuff?
You can check out my main channel at youtube.com/cynicalbrit. That's where all the general gaming stuff goes. If you're looking for StarCraft 2 esports, that's youtube.com/Totalbiscuit, and I can be followed on Twitter at twitter.com/Totalbiscuit, although I do have a less spammy feed for those who don't really enjoy my rantings and just want to know when my videos go up, which is twitter.com/cynicalbrit.
Very cool. Well, John, we'll have to have you on again sometime. Alex, I will talk to you again on Friday as we wrap up 2013. Thanks again, John.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute blast.